The concept of the pre-tribulation rapture is very popular among Christians, with only a minority holding different views. But is the popular view the correct view? Those who defend the pre-tribulation rapture claim there is biblical support. Those who are critics of the pre-tribulation rapture claim there is no verse in the Bible that expressly describes a pre-tribulation rapture. This video will examine the plain text of the Bible to assess how much support there is for the pre-tribulation rapture compared to other rapture theories. The rapture views that will be compared in this video are the pre-tribulation theory, the pre-wrath theory, and the post-tribulation theory. There are other theories, but here we will only examine these three because these theories are representative of the three different periods of time for when the rapture takes place relative to the tribulation. The rapture revolves around the concept of a great tribulation. The tribulation is believed to be a time of great worldly destruction that is associated with the second coming of Jesus Christ, who comes to judge the people of the world. Pre-tribulation and post-tribulation rapture theorists believe this period of tribulation is a 7-year period that begins with the opening of the 7 seals, goes through the blowing of the 7 trumpets, and ends with the pouring of the 7 bowls. Pre-wrath rapture theorists divide this 7-year period into the tribulation period described in the first 6 seals, and God's wrath described by the trumpets and bowls. For the purpose of this video, we will respect these views in assessing the biblical support for each theory. The pre-tribulation rapture theory has the rapture taking place before the period of tribulation. Therefore, Jesus should return before the first seal is even open, and Christians would not experience any of the tribulation. The post-tribulation rapture theory has the rapture after the tribulation period is over. Therefore, Christians must go through and endure the hardships revealed by the 7 seals, and the worldly disasters from the 7 trumpets and the 7 bowls. The pre-wrath rapture theory cuts the tribulation period short around the 6th seal, which is then followed by God's wrath, which begins with the first trumpet. So, pre-wrath theorists can say Christians are raptured after the tribulation, but before the wrath of God. There are many arguments in support of each theory. Some evidence is direct textual support from the Bible. Some evidence requires inferences that can be drawn from the biblical text, and some evidence requires assumptions and interpretations. Because assumptions can be wrong and interpretations can differ. This type of evidence is weaker than the others. And the stronger evidence would be the direct textual evidence, as it does not require much assumption or interpretation. Therefore, this video will examine the textual teachings of the rapture in the Bible, to see where the most plain and direct reading of the Bible leads us. To be clear, assumptions, inferences, and analogies are important when interpreting prophecies, but this video is only relying on the plain text because this is the best place to start. Inevitably, some interpretation or assumptions will have to be made, but we will try to keep this at a minimum. Turning to the text, many proponents of the rapture begin with 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 16 to 17, which reads, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." This text generally describes the rapture, but does not provide any reference as to when this event will take place. Therefore, all three theories receive 1 point because according to this text, there will be a rapture. We just don't know when. Biblical texts that provide insight as to the timing of the rapture is 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 10, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 9, and Romans chapter 5 verse 9. Each of these passages stands for the proposition that Christians will not be subject to the wrath of God. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 10 reads, "And to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus who delivers us from the wrath to come." 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 9 reads, "For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. And Romans chapter 5 verse 9 reads, "Since, therefore, we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God." So, from these texts we can say the Christians will avoid the wrath of God. The question is, when does the wrath of God begin? There's debate as to whether the first 6 seals are a part of God's wrath, or if God's wrath begins with the 7th seal, or first trumpet, or the 7th bowl. However, since this video is only looking at the plain and ordinary meaning of the Bible, we will rely on the plain text of Revelation chapter 6 verses 12 to 17, which expressly states that the wrath of God comes after the 6th seal was opened. "When he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful, and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" Therefore, for the purposes of this video, we will assume the wrath of God begins sometime around the 6th seal, but certainly before the 7 trumpets begin. Now, since 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 10, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 9, and Romans chapter 5 verse 9 state that Christians should not experience God's wrath, that appears to mean Christians are raptured around the 6th seal, or earlier. Since the pre-tribulation rapture theory has Christians raptured before the tribulation begins at the 1st seal, the pre-tribulation rapture theory receives 1 point for being consistent with Christians being raptured before the wrath of God begins. The pre-wrath rapture theory, as the name implies, also has Christians raptured before the wrath of God begins around the 6th seal, albeit well into the tribulation period. Therefore, the pre-wrath rapture theory also receives 1 point. However, the post-tribulation rapture theory has Christians raptured after the trumpet and the bowl judgments. Since we are only at seal 6 when the wrath of God begins, and we have not seen any of the trumpets or the bowls, the post-tribulation rapture theory receives a negative point, because, at face value, it appears to directly contradict 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 10, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 9, and Romans chapter 5 verse 9, which state that Christians will not experience the wrath of God. To be clear, the post-tribulation rapture theorists have an answer for this, but because it requires interpretations and assumptions, we will not address it here as we are only focusing on plain reading of the text. Another verse that speaks directly to the rapture is Matthew chapter 24 verses 3 to 13. The same event is described consistently in Mark chapter 13 verses 3 to 13 and Luke chapter 21 verses 7 to 19, so these will be considered as one event. Jesus is speaking with his disciples, and they ask him directly, when will be the sign of his coming and the end of the age? Matthew chapter 24 verses 3 to 13 reads as follows: As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved." So, Jesus directly tells his disciples that in the end times his followers will experience tribulation, that many will fall away from the faith, but it is the one who endures to the end that will be saved. Now, if all of this happens after Jesus' followers are raptured, why would they have to endure the tribulation? Why would many of Jesus' followers fall away if they are taken out of this world before the tribulation even begins? To the end of what must Jesus' followers endure to be saved? Because Jesus was expressly talking about the tribulation, in context, enduring to the end, must be referring to the end of the tribulation, which means Jesus' followers must endure to the end of the tribulation. But pre-tribulation rapture theorists believe the tribulation ends after the bowls, with the rapture taking place before the first seal, which appears to contradict what Jesus said. So, pre-tribulation rapture receives -1 point. According to pre-wrath theorists, the tribulation ends around the sixth seal before the wrath of God begins. For now, we are not challenging this view. Therefore, because pre-wrath rapture believes Christians are raptured after what they consider to be the tribulation, and before God's wrath, pre-wrath rapture receives 1 point. Post-tribulation rapture has Christians going through all 7 seals, all 7 trumpets, and all 7 bowls. Therefore, regardless of whether the tribulation ends after the 6th seal or the 7th bowl, this theory still receives 1 point because followers of Jesus would have to endure the period of tribulation. To summarize, Matthew chapter 24 verses 3 to 13 appears to state that followers of Jesus who are around during the end times will go through the tribulation, and those that endure the tribulation will be saved. This teaching contradicts a pre-tribulation rapture theory, but supports the pre-wrath and post-tribulation rapture theory. Matthew chapter 24 verses 29 to 30 also speaks to certain events we will see with Jesus' second coming. It reads, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." So, Jesus comes in a cloud, immediately after the tribulation of those days. If Jesus' coming is when the rapture takes place, then according to this verse, the rapture must take place immediately after the tribulation. Now, we currently have 2 theories of the tribulation period. According to pre-wrath theorists, the tribulation ends around the 6th seal before God's wrath begins with the trumpet and bowl judgments. According to pre-tribulation and post-tribulation theorists, the Great Tribulation ends after the 7th bowl. If Jesus directly states that his second coming takes place immediately after the tribulation, whether it be after the 6th seal or the 7th bowl, then there cannot be a pre-tribulation rapture. Therefore, the pre-tribulation rapture theory receives -1 point. If the rapture is immediately after the tribulation, and there is no mention yet of God's wrath, then the rapture appears to be pre-wrath. Therefore, the pre-wrath theory receives 1 point. Also, since this text expressly states that Jesus' coming is after the tribulation of those days, the post-tribulation rapture theory receives 1 point. Therefore, Matthew chapter 24 verses 29 to 30, in which Jesus says he is coming immediately after the tribulation, directly contradicts the pre-tribulation rapture theory, but supports the pre-wrath and post-tribulation rapture theories. Another Bible verse that speaks directly to the timing of the rapture is Revelation chapter 7 verses 9 to 14, which reads, "After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.' Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, 'Who are these, clothed in white robes, and from where have they come?' I said to him, 'Sir, you know.' And he said to me, 'These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb.'" So, according to Revelation chapter 7, a great multitude comes out of the great tribulation into what appears to be heaven after the 6th seal is opened as described in Revelation chapter 6. When John inquires as to who this great multitude is, the elder expressly states that these are those who have come out of the great tribulation. But they could not have come out of the great tribulation unless they were in the great tribulation. Comparing the description of the sixth seal in Revelation chapter 6 and Matthew chapter 24, we see an undeniable correspondence of events of Jesus' second coming and the great multitude's arrival in heaven. According to Matthew chapter 24, major events involving the sun, moon, and stars take place. Then Jesus returns to earth. According to Revelation chapter 6, what appears to be the same major events involving the sun, moon, and stars also take place around the sixth seal. According to Revelation chapter 7, the great multitude arrives in heaven after the sixth seal, but before the seventh seal, which is when the trumpets are blown as described in Revelation chapter 8. So, according to Matthew chapter 24 and Revelation chapter 6, the key event occurs with the sun, moon, and stars. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus arrives immediately after these events. In Revelation chapter 6, these events take place around the sixth seal. And, according to Revelation chapter 7, the great multitude are seen in heaven after these events. But, the pre-tribulation rapture theory has Christians arriving in heaven before the first seal is even opened. Therefore, the pre-tribulation rapture theory receives -1 point. Now, if these events with the sun, moon, and stars take place around the sixth seal, but we have yet to see the trumpet judgments and the bowl judgments, that means these people were raptured before the trumpet and the bowls had ended, but the post-tribulation theorists believe they should have been raptured after the trumpet and the bowls. Therefore, the post-tribulation rapture theory receives -1 point. Finally, since these people were taken out of the tribulation of seals 1 through 6, and God's wrath or judgment associated with the trumpets and bowls have not yet occurred, it appears the great multitude have been raptured after the tribulation and before the wrath of God. Therefore, the pre-wrath rapture theory receives 1 point. Therefore, the plain text of Revelation chapter 7 verses 9 to 14, in which a great multitude arrives in heaven after the tribulation of seals 1 to 6, but before the trumpets and the bowls, appears to support only the pre-wrath rapture theory. Another passage that appears to speak directly to the timing of the rapture is 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 51 to 52. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 16 makes a similar claim. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Relying on the plain and ordinary meaning, the last trumpet in Revelation appears to be the seventh trumpet, which is after the seals and before the bowls. So, if tribulation begins with the seals, but the rapture takes place at the last trumpet, then the rapture could not have taken place before the tribulation. Therefore, the pre-tribulation rapture theory receives -1 point. If the Christians are raptured at the seventh trumpet, but then afterwards, the bowl judgments take place, which are thought to be part of the tribulation, then the Christians could not be raptured after the tribulation ends, so the post-tribulation rapture theory receives -1 point. Finally, the plain and ordinary meaning of Revelation chapter 11 verses 15 to 18 demonstrates that the trumpets are God's wrath. So, if the Christians are raptured at the seventh trumpet, that means Christians were around for God's wrath during the first 6 trumpets. But, according to the pre-wrath theory, Christians should have been raptured before the trumpets begin. Therefore, the pre-wrath rapture theory also receives -1 point. In conclusion, just looking at the plain and ordinary meaning with minimal interpretation and assumptions, we can see that the pre-tribulation theory received a total of -2 points. The pre-wrath theory received a total of 4 points. And, the post-tribulation theory received a total of 0 points. Therefore, of the three rapture theories, based on the plain and ordinary reading of Bible verses, and relying on minimal inferences and assumptions, it appears that at least these verses actually contradict a pre-tribulation rapture theory and support theories in which Christians will experience at least some of the Great Tribulation. To be clear, this video does not prove any rapture theory. However, it should at least put into question any rapture theory you have been taught, and motivate you to 1. Evaluate for yourself the biblical support for the rapture theory being taught, and 2. Ask about the other rapture theories so that you can know what to expect just in case the theory you subscribe to is wrong. However, if you feel like holding on to the pre-tribulation rapture theory, but at some point you think you have been left behind and find yourself in a great tribulation, don't lose faith. Just remember to refuse the mark.